Heideggerian Eigentlichkeit, or authenticity, and its interpreters, let us say. So mainly let's discuss this article that just came out on the SVO, or Special Military Operation by Dugin, where he's giving his, in connection with his general anti-liberalism, he's giving a specific content to the Dasein characteristic of authenticity. So, dulce est decorum est pro patria mort, or more, and just the words of Horace in the 1st century BC Roman. It's sweet and becoming to die for the fatherland. These are the words that are most abhorred by those who like to repeat on behalf of the liberal order the words of Professor Johnson, who says the last refuge of the scoundrel is patriotism. So the reason for this is tied up with the notion of liberalism, which is not at the level of Dasein analysis, but it's a political idea which plays out with a specific determination, specific intervention in our lives, specific dispositif in the sense of Foucault. It makes a decision for us. It orients us. It's something like an economy in the old sense. It's the house that we live in a sense. And its simple content in this sense is that all the action is supposed to happen in something called society. So this is a Schmittian theme, very important for Schmitt, and therefore it shows light on the whole situation, is where we see the origin of the notion of society out of the polemics with Louis XIV and absolutism, where society is supposed to be a realm where basically, first and foremost, the wealthy can have freedom from the king or from the center. And then this develops into a general theory that the state, so as we see in Patrick Deenan today as one of the primary critics of this form of liberalism, so even Obama has read his book, so people in America on both liberal in the sense of Democrat, liberal in the sense of leftist, both leftists and rightists are reading this account of the so-called post-liberal order. This account is simply that the state is supposed to play a neutral role so that the wealthy can do what they want, and their opinions are meant to count only as opinions, subjective, rather than ever as truth, which is only the realm of law, which acts as the referee. So that's one sort of thin, sketchy account, philosophically a very poor account, but nonetheless it orients us in some way towards the problem. And furthermore, we can see the Dreyfus affair, about a little past 1890. What that means is basically, was the state treating everyone the same, or were they allowing for minorities to be treated differently. So the same issues we see today. And then Dreyfus was, as you can easily look up, Dreyfus was a Jewish officer in the French army who was accused of treason, although it turned out he wasn't guilty, but he was a scapegoat. And that was taken as the jumping off point for the early Zionists, Nordau, for example, who then said, oh, we can't be part of this neutral so-called society or cosmopolitan project because the state refuses to be neutral. And so then there's a problem. So I think Dugin orients what he's saying in this article, so I'll link to the article, which is about the total mobilization, which is now going underway. So it's the article is titled something like an existential justification for the SVO, or for the special military operation. And what it's mainly looking at is that death is being faced up to, and that so the actual existence as against the future is weighed in the light of possible physical killing, to put it in Schmittian terms, and facing up to this is then he's representing as authenticity. And this facing up is then in accord with a sort of radical patriotism, or procuring, taking a decision to procure triumph for the fatherland, basically, is what he's representing as the position of authenticity. So I don't have a problem with that so far as Dugin is saying of himself. He's faced up to the situation, and he's said, this is the decision I'm to take. But regarded in the light of, but regarded in the light of Heidegger, this is simply one specific situation where a decision is taken. So Heidegger says, Heidegger says, Goethe has said that every time we take a decision, every time we make a decision, every time we enter into this, so decision is a big issue in Schmitt, by the way, because he says the bourgeois are the ones that are the talking class, chattering class, that never make a decision but only want to talk about, deliberate perpetually and not actually make the decision. Taking a decision brings us, according to Goethe, into a situation of Schuld, or a guilt, because we're always there's always conflicts result from any decision. We can't meet the requirement. We're always going to no decision is going to lead to total good. It's always, there's some pros and cons in any decision, and there's always unforeseeable things, and any decision brings us into conflicts, and then we're guilty of something. This is basically facing up to a decision is basically what Heidegger means. So it's a total possibility of Dasein is to face up to a decision, and Dugin simply gives. So so I see the reason I don't agree with Dugin is not that I'm against his specific decision that he's taken to treat the SVO profoundly and as an existential decision, but it's just that that's not adequate as an interpretation of what Heidegger means by the distinction between the Eigenlich and the Das Man, because this is simply something which is always here in our Dasein, that we can always face up to a decision, we can always face up to understanding some issue in a certain way, or deciding to understand it in a certain way. This covers everything. It's not only a specific matter of having to do with war, or what Junger has called material Schlachten. So Schlachten means something like slaughter, but the way he understands material Schlachten is war of attrition, total war, where everything, all resources of a country, biological, industrial, technological, everything is to be exhausted, and everything is at stake. Material Schlachten. So this is the kind of decision that Dugin is saying can be taken authentically in the light of realizing this is death is at stake, and not just the point is here, I think, for Heidegger, is that death is in a certain way, although he says it's the ultimate possibility of Dasein, it's still just one possibility of Dasein. Dasein as a whole is superior, in a certain way, superior to death, or to all of its contents, with death being one. And therefore, as Mishima chose to, inscribe a poem in his viscera as he died, according to a certain artistic vision he had, or as Diogenes, according to one version, held his breath underwater and killed himself in order to demonstrate that he is superior to any kind of natural instinct. But so we're superior to death, and then authenticity is something higher than the mere following of this dispositif or economy, or the rule of things as they are going on, inclusive of people constantly criticizing any eccentricity, as John Stuart Mill would put it, that everyone has to do what one does, follow the manners and the etiquette and the ethos of one's fellows, and not be to use a slightly. So let's look at this in the light of two slightly different accounts. One, the one that stands at the culmination of the tradition, and also as a one version of liberalism, which is the Kantian version of liberalism, where Kant says society should be the sphere in which the laboratory experiment of the right of everyone to lie, free speech, is opened up, and that this is a gamble on a wager, as it were, to reach what he calls autonomy rather than heteronomy. So Heidegger has made a specific modification of the distinction between heteronomy, outside forces acting on us, people nagging you for not following whatever the manners or the etiquette is supposed to be, punctilio and so on, and at every level of your existence not following, or sort of this warped Sukarian version of that you get in Jordan Peterson, for example, although I sort of loathe to even mention it because it's at too low a level to be worth mentioning, but this sort of a sick demand to comply to the current circumstances rather than make a decision for oneself. So that if one assumes something like capitalist order, something like trying to equating happiness with having the most money, because money is a potential to it's a kind of power, the potential to take a trip somewhere, the potential to do things that are supposedly make one comfortable, or give one entertainment or enjoyment. If we would assume that this is the final dispositive decision has already been taken for us, if we have no real choice in the matter, then then picturing ourselves as drowning in that situation, of course, then we want somebody to tell us with certainty, as Descartes has on a higher level set down certainty with regard to epistemology. Then you get these people like Crestfall Dollar or Jordan Peterson on a much lower level, hawking certain rules for how to do things. And then if you follow those, then you're, I suppose, except in very rare cases, this would be inauthentic, I think. Although, this is what I want to say. Anyone could face up to a certain teaching and then on their own 2 feet take a decision in the light of their own existence, like that of Heidegger shows with the Ivan Ilyich example, realizing themselves and then taking a decision out of their own Dasein. So to give that more point more to this, in Nietzsche, if you want to look at what corresponds to this in Nietzsche, he calls it ipsismosity, and that corresponds to this famous saying of each one is their own kind or their own species. So if you're your own if you're a human being by the traditional account, there's something called reason, which controls your future, and if you could only get the vantage of reason properly, then you know what's sweet and becoming to a human being. But if it becomes questionable how to reach this vantage of knowledge, which it has, then taking a decision out of one's existence rather than out of a supposed path that would lead to a vantage on the eternal truth, then this is how this idea goes from autonomy, which would be like having this true reason, like having this true vantage on the truth, which is still Francis Bacon talks about in a transformed way, having to do with mathematical control of a theory of causes, or of gravity, or of so-called forces which control the reason why inertial movement alters itself sometimes by something going straight starts to turn when it comes into the gravitational field or something else, and explaining motion primarily becomes the only thing which people think this true vantage point on reason can really get us. And then sort of the rubbish heap behind that is everything that goes on in the society, which is contrasted with not just the king or government, but also with the supposed objective truth of technology. And so I think this issue it's wider than the one particular decision, which as a passionary Dugin is taking. So he's taking a decision in Eigenlichkeit, or in authenticity, with respect to the SVO, but that's simply one specific instance of what's meant by authenticity, but it's not. But he's representing it. The reason I don't agree with that is he's representing it as though that were authenticity itself, or as though that exhausted this possibility in Dasein to either drift along with the economy of forces, with the determination and with the etiquette and with the patterns already in play, or taking a stand, as it were, and making oneself responsible inner responsibility, as Heidegger would put it. So, and also I could say this: Heidegger was basically a pacifist, and one can see that in that Leo Strauss has pointed to the dedication to the Paul Natorp in the Sophist book, where Heidegger's talking about World War I. So Heidegger does say war gives about as much as it takes. So because everybody is together in a war, and therefore that brings something to people. So that's something Dugin's view offers to the Russians in that sense. But at the same time, Heidegger himself has pointed to, as an example of inner responsibility, the youth just before World War I broke out, who had convened a peace conference in the north of Germany.